Okay, kicking off with Curse Scroll, the 1 mana artifact. It was a very strong card back in the day. It was part of a tier 1 deck in Standard of its time. So you pay 3, tap it, name a card, and then the opponent chooses a card randomly from your hand. And if it was the card that you named, Curse Scroll deals 2 damage to that player or a creature that you choose. The trick being that you only have 1 card in your hand, so it's guaranteed to be that card, and the effect goes ahead. Nowadays, the card is too weak for the formats it's allowed to be played in, so Legacy, Vintage, it's just way too weak, mainly because it deals a fixed amount of damage, the 2 damage. It's not scalable, it doesn't go up and down based on other factors. I think it's likely that they'll riff off this card in the future, try and emulate it or throw back, that kind of thing, and they could easily make it a better card. 3 damage would be better and not broken. I don't know, or they could just make it deal damage based on the mana cost on a card. I don't know, but as it is, it's too weak, so they might try to remake it a stronger version of it. And that being said, it's not good enough to invest in. Maybe you shouldn't spec on this one. Rock of Care Ridges, 3 colors and a red for a 3/3 flying. Yeah, all in all, that's pretty bad. It's bad mainly because its power creep has made it obsolete. So for that reason, it's not worth specking on. It's not a great card. It doesn't see play anywhere, so it's only something to complete collections. Next up is Glacial Crevasses, a red enchantment that costs 2 and a red, so 3 mana. And you can activate it, sacrifice a snow-covered mountain to have no creatures deal damage in combat for this turn. It sounds fairly strong, but there's no real need for these kind of creatures don't deal combat damage kind of effects. They're not really where the game is headed. So, but it is a good card, and the effect is quite strong. And combined with a Crucible of Worlds, you just get to do the effect over and over. So I'd say it's a little bit better than mediocre. Maybe it's okayish, goodish, but mostly if it's a sort of strategy that works in the games you play, you should pick up a copy. Maybe not worth going too deep on the specs on. Next we have Escaped Shapeshifter, 3 and 2 blue for a 3/4 creature. And then as long as your opponent controls any creatures with flying, the Shapeshifter gets flying. And the same applies to First Strike, Trample, and Protection from any color. So firstly, the problem is your opponents have to have control the creatures with those ability keywords. Otherwise, it doesn't get it. So just you having those creatures won't pass on the effect. But also, all of those keywords are pretty mediocre. It's even if you got all of them on 1 card for 5 mana, 3/4 flying, first strike trample. It's still not really that strong of a card. So it's probably best not to spec on this one. And we have Fungus Elemental, 3 and a green for a 3/3, so it's pretty weak. Has the ability, you can pay a green, sacrifice a forest to put a +2/+2 counter on it, and you can use the ability on the turn it comes into play. So it's like a scalable creature, can flexibly be bigger if you need it to be bigger, but in reality it's really bad. You're sacrificing forest to make it bigger, and then as soon as it gets removed, all that effort is undone. And in the end, it's still just a big creature, which my position on those. Not worth specking on at all. All right, we have Kravikan Horror, 3 and a black for a 2/2. So at the end of turn, if it's in your graveyard with a creature card above it, you may put it into your hand, so that's pretty bad because sorted graveyards aren't really a thing anymore, so I'm not sure how applicable that is. And the ability, it's not too bad, but it's somewhere in the mediocre to okayish range. You pay 1 and you sacrifice a creature to have Kravike and Horror deal 1 damage to a creature or a player. So as long as you've got mana and lots of creatures to sacrifice, you can deal 1 damage per activation, which is pretty weak. But if you need another sack outlet or you want this ability, it's okay. Maybe a bit overcosted for it though. Alrighty, Inner Sanctum, 1 and 2 white, so 3 mana, enchantment with a cumulative upkeep of 2 life. All damage dealt to creatures you control is reduced to 0. So it's not too bad of a card, but it only prevents damage, so creatures can still be removed by other means. But if you play a lot of games where it's just damage that you're trying to prevent, it's not too bad. Buy it to play with, not to try and invest. Alright, we're on to Misfortune. 1, a black, a red, and a green for a sorcery, and the target opponent chooses 1. Either you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and gain 4 life, or you put a -1/-1 counter on each creature that opponent controls, and Misfortune deals 4 damage to him or her. I could have probably skipped the card as soon as I read target opponent chooses because most of those cards are bad. Letting your opponent choose means you usually won't get the choice that you actually wanted. So if you get the +1/+1 counters and gain 4 life, that's not really that strong. You still got to attack through for the win. And the -1/-1 counters, they'll pick that option if it doesn't really hurt them that badly, and dealing 4 damage is not really that big in the grand scheme of things. So I'd say it's a pretty weak card, but it's fun. It was one of the cards I got in one of my alliances packs, and I always wanted to figure out how to use it well, but definitely not something to invest in. Okay, up to Demonic Attorney, colorless and 2 black. It's another anti-card, so it's got no home, doesn't get any play. You're only buying it if you like the artwork or you're collecting the set, so otherwise just stay away. Demonic Hordes, 3 and 3 black for a 5/5, but that's not the good thing about the card. It's mainly the tap it to destroy a land, but it's got a strict upkeep of 3 black mana, and if you don't pay it, then you have to tap Demonic Hordes, and an opponent gets to destroy one of your lands. It's a pretty strong card, was very strong back in casual play back in the day, and it's still quite fun and fairly useful. Probably not overpowered because there's a lot of things nowadays that are just much stronger than this. But I'd still have a copy just for my collection, but probably not something you'd spec on. And Asmara Holy Avenger, 2 colorless, green and a white for a 2/3 flying. At the end of each turn, you put +1/+1 counters on it for each creature that went to your graveyard during the turn. So it's just another creature that grows bigger, but it really doesn't have any relevance in today's gameplay. It's not strong at all, so not worth specking on. Guiding Spirit, 1 colorless, a white and a blue for a 1/2 flying, and it's got the ability that if the top card of a player's graveyard is a creature card, you can put it on top of that player's library. So not fully a reanimate spell or effect, but more of a sort of utilitarian kind of thing. It's not that strong, and once again, it suffers from being relying on the playing with sorted out graveyards, which is a bit of a pain. Not really worth specking on in any. Okay, we have Aurum, Samite Healer. So it's 1 and 2 white mana for a 1/3. Counts as a cleric, and you can tap it to prevent up to 3 damage to a creature or a player. So yeah, once again, it's a pretty weak card. Preventing damage isn't really something anyone's trying to do, and it's not really going to have much of an effect on the game. 3 is a lot more than you usually get from these kind of effects. But the main thing is life gain has been pushed really hard these days, so preventing damage doesn't have the same confluence of spells and effects and cards that make it good. So really, you'd rather have something that works with a synergy with other cards, and this doesn't really have much. So it's unlikely to be worth much in the long run. We have Suleiman's Legacy for 1 red mana, 1 white mana. It's an enchantment, and when it comes into play, destroy all Djinns and Ifrits, and it just stops people playing Djinns and Ifrits. It's not a super strong card. That relevant creature type, no, probably not. So unlikely to really be worth much in the long run. Alright, we have Citadel Centaurs, 3 and a green for a 6/3. Can't be the target of spells or abilities. Another one of those cards from back in the day where that was a semi-powerful card text. Nowadays, it's not really relevant. And the worst thing about it is it has echo, so it's probably never going to see play. Yeah, don't even need to spec on this one. Next up, Kukamesa Pirates, 3 and a blue for a 2/2. If it attacks and is not blocked, you may choose to have it deal no damage to the defending player. If you do, gain control of target artifact that player controls. So it's probably not good enough for vintage and other old card formats, but it's not a bad card. And in more casual play games, it's actually pretty good. There's enough kind of cards and stuff that helps creatures go through, making them unblockable. Do it to this, it's guaranteed to be unblocked, and then you get to take an artifact, control an artifact from one of your opponents. So yeah, it's got some useful ability. I can't understand why you don't see it more, but it's pretty weak. Maybe it's not worth investing in. More of a card to, if you want to play, you should get a copy or two. We have Spectral Guardian, which is 2 and 2 white, 4 mana for a 2/3. But the main part is the card text. As long as Spectral Guardian is untapped, non-creature artifacts cannot be the target of spells or effects. So that might have some usefulness if you're playing a deck full of artifacts and you know your opponent has a lot of ways to deal with them. You play this, and then you don't really have to worry about somebody going out after you or your artifacts. That being said, it's a creature, so it can easily be dealt with. But it's just another layer of complexity on your opponent taxing their game. It's okay. I don't think it's really worth specking on though. And we have Dystopia, 1 colorless, 2 black for an enchantment. Cumulative upkeep is 1 life. During each player's upkeep, if that player controls any green or white permanents, he or she sacrifices a green or a white permanent. So yeah, it's quite a strong effect. It's one of those hate cards I mentioned earlier, but the downsides are pretty obvious. If they're not playing green or white, it doesn't really do anything, and people get upset if you play things like this, and it really is an iffy sort of situation there. But it's a low casting cost card, and it's pretty strong. So if it fits your game plan and you think it's good, you should play it. Investment wise, it isn't really something that you would invest in, but things can change. So it's something I'd keep an eye on.